one inmate told us that one of the things he watches the most is the news coverage on the Idaho killings, basically his own coverage. He reportedly admitted to being suicidal and having no emotions or feelings of remorse. I feel like an organic sack of meat with no self-worth. Ever since 4 University of Idaho students were found stabbed to death at home in November of 2022, people have been asking who would do such a horrific thing. Well, police and prosecutors believe that the answer to that question is this man, whose face and name you are probably far too familiar with at this point, 28-year-old Bryan Kohberger. Now, I cannot tell you whether or not he did it or why those 4 lives were so brutally snuffed out all those months ago. He is, after all, innocent until proven guilty. But I can tell you quite a bit about Bryan Kohberger, who is currently facing 4 counts of capital murder. He's been described by those who know him as both a polite, quiet student and an arrogant, misogynist bully. Kohberger is currently being held in the Latah County Jail while he awaits trial, and we know what his life is like there. DailyMail.com spoke with current and former inmates who revealed some truly chilling details. During the day, Kohberger gets to watch TV, and one inmate told us that one of the things he watches the most is the news coverage on the Idaho killings, basically his own coverage. The inmate said, quote, he watches himself all the time and called it bizarre. Now, aside from that, sources said he keeps a low profile, a really low profile. Multiple prisoners told us that Kohberger doesn't look at or speak to anyone in jail and has 2 guards with him pretty much everywhere he goes. Now, jail officials have described him as a model prisoner, and he's found God. Kohberger receives private gospel services and religion classes with ministers from Project Hope Idaho every single week. Now, what the accused quadruple murderer discusses in these sessions is a mystery. The sheriff's department insisted that the organization sign a special non-disclosure agreement, which I guess is typical. Now, this is the 2nd jail that Kohberger has been in so far since his arrest. He was taken into custody first in Pennsylvania and then extradited to Idaho earlier this year. Shortly after he was arrested, police sources revealed to People magazine that he seemed nervous behind bars. Despite not having a prior criminal record, though, the criminal justice system is very familiar to Bryan Kohberger. You see, Bryan has a bachelor's in psychology and a master's in criminal justice from DeSales University. There, he studied under famed forensic psychologist Dr. Catherine Ramsland, who is one of the top criminal justice minds in the country. Now, while he was getting his master's, Kohberger studied the criminal mind, wanting to learn how criminals chose their victims and carried out their crimes. As a student investigator, Bryan pulled criminals through an anonymous Reddit survey, wanting to know things like how they prepared for their crime and what they did before leaving. At the time of his arrest, Kohberger had just completed the first semester of a criminology PhD program at Washington State University. And he not only had an academic interest in criminal justice, but he also wanted to work in law enforcement. According to his arrest affidavit, Kohberger had applied for an internship with the Pullman, Washington Police Department, and his application, he wrote that, quote, he had interest in assisting rural law enforcement agencies with how to better collect and analyze technological data in public safety operations. Now, while at WSU, he was not only a student, but also a teaching assistant. And it is through that TA job that we get some unsettling stories about his interactions with women. Just this week, sources at the university described him as essentially a misogynist. This is what they told News Nation. Quote, Kohberger allegedly told female colleagues that men were going to take their jobs because women aren't as smart. Now, those sources also accused Kohberger of grading female students more harshly than male students, so much so that complaints were made to the school. Now, WSU hasn't verified those complaints. However, Kohberger was fired from his TA position shortly before he was arrested over repeated incidents of unprofessionalism with a professor. His termination letter was obtained by Banfield, and it outlined a track record of issues with this professor that he was supposed to be assisting. noting that Kohberger had 2 altercations and failed to improve his professionalism. Now, this actually isn't really surprising to me, considering everything else I've learned about his personality from former friends and coworkers, many of whom have described him as arrogant and needing to be the smartest person in the room. He did seem to be a bit different when he was younger, though. Daily Mail exclusively reported that the FBI sat down with Kohberger's middle school crush as part of their investigation. Kim Kenley contacted the Bureau after Kohberger was arrested to see if she could help in any way with the investigation. And according to Kim's mom, Bryan would often tell her when they were kids how pretty she was, and her daughter Kim would repeatedly rebuff his preteen advances. Her mom admitted, though, that kids can be mean at that age, and Kim did not give Kohberger the time of day. Several of his fellow students have told Daily Mail that Bryan had been the chubby kid who got picked on relentlessly, specifically by those cheerleader types. One anonymous source made this chilling observation. It's interesting to me that the girls he's accused of killing were nice-looking and seemingly popular, much like the ones that made fun of him throughout his childhood. And in high school, it seems it was just not any easier for him. The New York Times uncovered disturbing online posts from a 16-year-old Bryan Kohberger, where he reportedly admitted to being suicidal and having no emotions or feelings of remorse. I feel like an organic sack of meat with no self-worth. As I hug my family, I look into their faces, I see nothing. It is like I am looking at a video game, but less. Casey Arntz, a former friend of Kohberger's in high school, has spoken out quite a bit about he continued to be bullied for his weight even into his teen years. She's also alleged that Kohberger became addicted to heroin in high school and would use her to drive him to obtain illegal drugs, unbeknownst to her at the time. Now, Casey and her brother Thomas said that at some point, the bullied became the bully. Thomas called him mean-spirited and said that between junior and senior year at some point, Kohberger went through a huge personality shift. Now, it was during that time that Bryan dropped a significant amount of weight, got into boxing and fitness. In his yearbook, there's even a photo of Kohberger doing push-up. But despite dropping an estimated 100 pounds, Kohberger's luck with women never seemed to improve. No exes have come forward to speak out since his arrest, and come to think of it, no exes have ever really been mentioned by anyone at all so far, which kind of just leads me to believe he doesn't have any. Just one woman has spoken out about going on a single date with Kohberger 7 years ago, and she said that it was all so awkward she pretended to vomit to get him to leave. He was also once reprimanded for creeping out female employees and customers of the Seven Sirens Brewing Company in Pennsylvania. Jordan Cerulnik, the owner, told NBC News that Kohberger would come in alone and just sit and watch. Now, this place scans your IDs when you walk in the door, and it keeps them in a computer program where you can add notes about different customers. Cerulnik said that the note on Kohberger's profile read, "Hey, this guy makes creepy comments. Keep an eye on him. He'll have 2 or 3 beers and then just get a little too comfortable." According to staffers, Kohberger would ask women if they were there alone and where they lived, and then got upset when they weren't interested. Kohberger spent most of his life in rural Pennsylvania near the Poconos. He was born in 1994 to Michael and Marianne Kohberger, who both worked for the local school district. He's the youngest of 3 and the only boy. Kohberger's 2 older sisters, Melissa and Amanda, are both in their 30s, and since his arrest have lost their jobs simply because they're related to him. Melissa was a school counselor and Amanda was an actress. But News Nation reported that they are now out of work and the Kohberger family is struggling with finances in the wake of his arrest. Just an odd little aside here, in 2011, Bryan's actress sister once starred in a low-budget slasher movie where students were stabbed to death. In their statement, the Kohbergers wrote, "As a family, we will love and support our son and brother." And in January, his family attended his extradition hearing in Pennsylvania. When Bryan walked into the courtroom, he was seen mouthing the words, "I love you," to his parents. But beyond that, there really has not been much from them. None of his immediate family members have visited him in jail in Idaho while he awaits trial, and his arrest came as a shock, according to Kohberger's attorney. It's unclear whether he communicates with his family or anyone at all while he is in jail right now. Prior to his arrest, though, several reports describe him as being quite chatty. One of his neighbors told CBS that after the quadruple homicide, Kohberger brought up the gruesome killings to him in casual conversation and reportedly suggested that it was a crime of passion. And things were just business as usual for Kohberger, too. He attended classes and showed up for routine medical appointments. The receptionist at his doctor's office spoke to Insider and said that less than a week after the murders, Kohberger was in the office chatting, and she called him charming. Now, all of his appearances since his arrest have been in court, where he's appeared calm and quiet with the occasional polite smile. That's a little creepy if you ask me. But we're going to see him right back in court in just a few months at the end of June.